a lot of times, if you go to buy a business, you can buy something that you can't start, or you're able to take years off of that, the trenches, the gut work, and that can be a significant advantage to getting ahead.
It's going to be easier to start at ground zero than to try and take something that already exists and have to rebuild it or re-identify it or change a culture. Sometimes changing a culture is more difficult than establishing something brand new from the beginning.
Welcome to the Abundant Journey podcast, where we talk with incredible entrepreneurs who give world-class advice from their own journeys. I'm your host, Nick James, and I'm a commercial banker turned business owner, along with my co-host, Nick Aufenkamp. We want to help you grow and scale your business while not losing sight of what matters most. Join us as we learn from the experts what it takes to grow $1 million business. What's going on, Abundant Journey community? It is Nick James, as always, with Nick Aufenkamp. I hope you guys are doing good and having a great day. We have another awesome episode lined up today. And Nick, I say that a lot, but man, how are you?
I'm good. I'm going to call it out. We've been doing this for almost 2 years, coming up on 100 episodes, and it brings me a little bit of delight that you still sometimes stumble over my last name.
That's it. I do the best that I can, and we need to come up with a code name for you, or we can just keep going with Nick and Nick.
Yeah. Nick and Nick is pretty simple. I remember, I think it was in our first episode, we were trying to figure out the code name. If I was going to be Nick Jr. or Nick the Second. I don't think we ever settled on a good one, and
I don't know that we did.
Just trying to have this conversation right now is reminding me why. So we should probably spare our listeners trying to go any further down that rabbit hole, unless, of course, anybody just has fantastic names for us.
That's right.
If anybody wants to propose those, the comment section is open. Email is open. So if you got a good way of distinguishing us, we would love to hear it.
We would love to hear it indeed. Every once in a while, our guests get stumbled on that. Well, listeners, today you are hanging out with just the two of us. And, as we've shared in recent episodes, both of us are really on our journeys in growing and scaling our businesses. We're driving towards that $1 million mark. And I think I've also said in a past episode, you will soon get to really follow along in my journey as I reveal the business that I've bought a few months ago and what that's looking like the day in, the day out. And of course, you're doing some of your entrepreneurial stuff, both as a realtor and some other things you got going on. But today we thought it would be fun to dive into one of those hot topics. And there seems to be a lot of headwind lately in social media and things around that, and conversations of, should you buy a business or should you start a business? And of course, you have the one group of people who are like, buy a business. Why would you ever start a business? It is total failure. You will not succeed. Within X amount of years, your business will fail. And then you got the other group of people who are like, well, no, I did it all myself and I went through the grind. And I would say a majority of our guests have started their own business. And of course, they've been successful, which is why we have them on the show. So that's what we're talking about today. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's no surprise, right, that on our show we would have the weirdos, the minority that have actually started their own thing and been successful with it. But I think that you're right. Like, the statistics for new businesses are bleak. Most of them do not work out. And especially if you follow like the Cody Sanchez's of the world, or the Nick Hubers with Sweaty Startup, I mean, the statistics are so much better for when you're buying an existing business with proven sort of clientele. But it is interesting because I think that the way I'm wired is very much like, I want to start my own thing. I want to start from scratch. And I think that that you, being the wise and fair one that you are, tend much more towards the, no, I'm going to buy something that's established and existing. So I think that it'll be a interesting conversation back and forth as we talk about both the merits and challenges of starting versus buying. It's as you've alluded to as well, like we're both living it because you did buy an existing business. And how long, remind me, how long was the business that you bought? When was it established relative to when you bought it?
Yeah, and that's one of my big points for going with an existing business is there is a lot of things in place, and we'll, I'm sure, talk about it today. But the business I bought has been around for 20 years. And so there's pros and cons to that. For better or worse, there's a reputation in the market. Yeah. There is a name that is recognized by people. And so if that is not a good name and not a good reputation, there's a lot that I have to overcome. But additionally, if you're buying something that is well known and well liked in the market, that could be a big advantage versus kind of breaking into the market, into the competition.
Right, which is frankly both of the businesses, the real estate business, the Tartan team that I started last year, and then the one that I'm not quite ready to pull the veil off of the top of yet, that I've been working on and ready to start publicly launching in the next couple of months here. Those are both from ground zero with zero brand identity. The proverbial concrete is nothing but wet, if it's even poured yet, is kind of the question, which definitely has its own drawbacks and advantages. So I don't know, man, you want to kind of kick it off with the sort of pros and cons of starting or buying?
Man, either one. Why don't we do this? I'll dive in and, again, this has been about a 5-month journey for me. And so I can kind of share some of the pros and cons of buying a business that I've experienced so far. And man, then I'll kick it over to you. So, first and foremost, we really kind of said it, but having that established business in place, I think, is really huge for a couple of reasons. It isn't just name and it isn't just brand, but in addition to that, there can be established employees. There can be an established systems and processes. And we talk so much about that here on Abundant Journey because that's the key to growing and scaling. The gunslinger who says, I'm going to do this all on my own, oftentimes they're wearing all of the hats. But when you're buying a business, you should be looking for, hey, are these systems and processes and those kinds of things established and in place? So one of the things I've experienced is not only do I have employees, not only is there brand and name reputation, but in addition to that, there is current relationships. There's customer relationships and repeat clients. I can tell you that with the business that we've bought, I just did a self-audit a week or two ago, and over half of the jobs that my guys have completed have come from repeat customers and repeat clients. So that's a huge advantage where I have this base that I get to work on and keep us moving while I'm looking for new ways to enter the market and new ways to grow clients and business.
Yeah. Which is solid. I mean, that's an amazing thing to be able to inherit because one of the greatest struggles, I think, of starting something from scratch is just client acquisition up front. Nobody knows you. Nobody's calling after having used you in the past or being referred to you. Like, you are very much having to go out and hunt. And I know that while you still feel that, like you alluded to, with having to create new business and obviously wanting to grow things and expand things, it is nice to have some sort of reputation to be able to lean on or recognition. I would love to talk about that, though. When it comes to reputation and buying something that's existed for 20 years, like there's a pretty established culture that for 20 years you didn't get to build it. And now you're stepping into the culture for what it is. And obviously you've got, your own culture and vibe that you're wanting to create. And so just talk to me about both the benefits and the challenges of inheriting a business culture and reputation.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I've experienced that in full effect. You and I both know the business that I bought, and we keep saying the business I bought. I haven't done the actual reveal of it yet. And you guys, listeners, need to go check out here soon me documenting my journey, because I think the second or third episode in, I actually reveal that, and it will become common knowledge soon enough. But it's kind of the tease before we actually get that released. But, one of the things you and I both know is that the business I bought had a mixed review of the culture and the work that the guys do. And so that's been an interesting hurdle to have to overcome. We've lost some jobs and some work because of the reputation of the business. And so I've had to try to come in and correct that. And so that's been a huge thing. What I've found, and that surprised me a little bit, is that culture first starts with the employees. You can try to rebrand and re-logo and rename. That doesn't mean anything if you can't back it up with who you say you are now. And so that culture has to start with the employees. And one of the things that I've found really early on is that the guys are actually ready for that. They are excited for that, really that breath of fresh air that, hey, this is not how we do things. We're going to do things differently now. But on top of that, they get excited about the direction of what I want to take the business. And so I think when you have a business that's been around for 20 years, it's slowed down, things are getting quieter, the opportunity to step in and kind of give it fresh perspective, fresh breath, excitement, direction. A lot of times, if you're excited about it, I think your people are going to be excited about that direction too. Not always. I don't think that's always the case. Sometimes people are like, no, this is how we've always done it, and this is what we're going to do, which is fine. Hopefully you can win those people over. But I think ultimately it's been something that I've experienced that guys are really excited about.
Yeah. And I think a related question is, when you're buying something, generally you're buying it from the existing owner, unless it's like a real weird situation where the owner passed and it's kind of like part of an estate or something, but that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
And so talk to me a bit about what that's like, and just sort of the pros and cons of having the relationship with the previous owner, and ways that you can leverage that for your advantage, and perhaps if there are any challenges that creates as well.
No, I think it does. And obviously I have my experience and I'll share that, but beyond that, I mean, you guys all know that I was a commercial banker before this. And so I've seen a lot of business transactions. Sometimes those relationships go south pretty fast, or sometimes, the business owner wants to continue to do things the way they've always done it. And the new owner comes in and they want to take things in a totally different direction. That's an interesting balance, because really we know that business owners, this is their baby. I mean, this is something oftentimes they started and have grown for X amount of years, and they've put their heart and soul into it, their sweat, their tears, they've sacrificed with their family. And so then to say, hey, yeah, that was all right, but we're going to take this in a different direction, I think tension can arise. And so ultimately in my perspective, you want to have a really good relationship with the past owner. And sometimes you want to keep them around. Sometimes you want a clean break and let them ride off into the sunset, let them retire, let them do what they are going to do. That hasn't been my experience, and it's been really awesome. And the way that I structured the acquisition of the business was to keep the owner at the table for a few years. And I wanted it that way because he had 20 years of experience. And so how often do we talk on the podcast here about surrounding yourself with mentors, surrounding yourself with guardrails, surrounding yourself with people who have done it really well? And so in that, I've tried to take that advice that we've gotten from our guests and say, hey, let's keep this guy at the table because he's an awesome guy. He wants to see me succeed. And that's been huge. You know, one of the advantages going back a little bit to buying a business is I remember when we just had Ryan Dice on the show, he talked about how when you start a business, there's a period where you don't really have any customers coming in and things are slow. Well, when I bought a business, we were walking into busy season. I didn't experience that. So we had to hit the ground running and the guys were going, and I had never done this before. So having the owner at the table and leaning on his expertise and advice was huge. And that was a big deal for me.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I do see how that can be extremely beneficial, and basically, like, there's kind of it doesn't always work out this way, but in your case, built-in mentorship that's sort of part of the acquisition. Not only are you inheriting the assets, the branding, the employees, but you're getting some of that 20 years of wisdom and experience from the previous owner to set you up to succeed, versus when you're, again, going out and doing your own thing. Typically, if you're going to get any sort of mentorship, you've got to go out and find that on your own.
Maybe even pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. And even there, it can be a little bit more challenging because you've got to do a lot more vetting on who that mentor is and whether or not they actually have success, and if they get your vision, if they're going to be able to help you execute that, or it can be fraught with its own challenges.
Totally. No, I think you're right. I think those, it's funny as we have approached these topics of buying or starting. I mean, there's challenges, there's pain in all of it. That is the mark of an entrepreneur, because I think everything we believe, at least everything worth doing, is going to cost you something, and it's going to cost you a lot, especially in entrepreneurship. And so, it really is picking a path that aligns well with your goals and your vision. And I'm excited to dive in a little bit to, your experience of starting a business, some of the things that have been challenging. Maybe one last advantage, I think, of buying a business, and this is something I think we've talked at length before about, is really, because there's the systems, there is the processes in place. Sometimes they're outdated and janky, but one of the things that comes with that is a lot of times, if you go to buy a business, you can buy something that you can't start, or you're able to take years off of that, the trenches, the gut work. And, that can be a significant advantage to getting ahead. And that's why I think, we have people like Dave Ederer on there who's come in, and I mean, we know he's in his 80s. He's bought and sold over 35, 40 businesses in his career. And so he saw the advantage in the game to play of, let's buy something that's already there. And one of the things that maybe a warning to people who are in the process of buying a business, or they've explored that, I think one of the dangers is not asking the question, can I start this for cheaper and just put my effort into it and get me there, as opposed to, what am I actually buying? And it seems like an obvious question, but I think that's something you and I had talked about when we were looking at a decking and fence company. And I remember when we were in the exploratory phase of that business together, we stopped and said, hey, what are we buying? And what are we getting that we can't start on our own? And the reason why I think that was really important is because that, if you remember, was, I think, a little over $1 million purchase price. And it was like, yeah, we're buying cash flow or we're buying revenue, but there's no repeat customers. And the guys who are the laborers can walk off the job site at any point. There isn't a book of business. So we were looking on and saying, hey, we're going to strap ourselves to $1 million in debt. What are we getting, as opposed to starting a decking and fence company? Yeah, we're going to have to go through the suck phase and the grind of getting customers and building a brand and building a reputation. But I think ultimately we looked on and said, man, we could start something, dump $100,000 into this thing, and probably it wouldn't take too long to get us to where they are. I don't know. Is that how you remember that?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair summary. And it kind of raises the question of, yeah, what businesses should you consider buying versus starting on your own? What are businesses that you shouldn't buy? And the biggest concern, right, with the decking and fencing business was that neither you or I have any experience really with building decks or installing fences. And so there was the big concern that it was like, all right, if we do lose skilled laborers, those aren't people that you just find everywhere all the time. You know, there's actually a huge shortage of skilled laborers. And so if, like you're saying, if they walk, like all of a sudden your business's value takes a huge hit.
Totally.
And it's not like we were going to be able to just step in and fulfill that role. And there was no way of guaranteeing that people would stay with us during an ownership transition as well. And in that case too, like the owners had built a really amazing culture, but it was so much around their personalities and the relationships that they had had with their staff for a long, long time, which was really cool. But that's really hard as a new owner to expect that you're going to be able to step in, and I think unrealistic to expect that you're just going to step in and take on those relationships where they're at, or that people are going to feel the same kind of loyalty and affinity to you that they did to the previous owners that they were working with for a decade.
Oh, totally. No, and they, in that journey, we learned a lot just looking at this business and meeting with the owners. That was a fun one, but I think you're exactly right. That culture that they had created was huge, and they were excited about us looking at taking over and building that culture. But you're exactly right. I think additionally to what you're saying, that's a good question. What are some pitfalls or things you want to look for as you're looking to buy a business? A couple other things that we've either experienced or learned is, what is the barrier to entry? And the reason why is that, there's a lot of people who have bought landscaping businesses very successfully. But I use that as an example of, if you are spending a ton of money to buy a landscaping company that's got 50 clients, and the barrier to entry is, hey, you need a handful of mowing machines and a truck and a trailer. The barrier to entry is pretty easy, and that's a very saturated market. So we're not anti-landscaping companies to buy, but you just need to ask that question constantly. What am I getting that I can't start or create myself? And really weighing the pros and the cons there. I think you hit another one. What is the technical labor and the skill set of the people? If you lose your people, what do you do then? And then I would say maybe a third one, just in conversation, is, is there bad systems and processes? Is the owner the guy who does everything? And again, I'm not saying you can't buy that, but are you just buying a job? And I think here at Abundant Journey, we're very passionate about helping business owners get out of the job they just bought or the job that they've created for themselves, because oftentimes there's this glamour and glorification of being an entrepreneur, but then folks are in this grind for years and they don't know how to get out of this process. They don't know how to build systems. They don't know how to build teams. And so they're like, nobody does it better than me. I'll just do it. If you're buying a business that was established and set that way, and maybe the owner's burnt out and they're ready to just be done, you're buying a job. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if that's what you want to sign up for, okay, go ahead. But I don't think that's really who we're trying to help here.
Right. Absolutely. No, that's really good. And I think at its best, when you're buying a business, you're buying time, like 20 years of history. And so you're accelerating yourself in that regard, buying what somebody else has invested. You're buying relationships, both with existing clientele, as well as relationships with suppliers or other professional business relationships. And then you're purchasing employees typically.
Yeah.
And then for better or worse, like you'd said, you're buying a brand, and what people recognize when they see your brand or think of you. And yeah, that's really, I think, where the value of a business is. And of course, yeah, the profitability and the trajectory that you could take something on.
Totally.
And I think that's when I think about our audience as well, and we'll probably get into this more as the conversation continues, but when we think about with our listeners getting people over that $1 million a year threshold, thinking about the differences between buying a business and starting something from scratch when it comes to actually getting over that $1 million a year threshold and feeling that, realizing that as the business owner. Because one of the things that we didn't talk about with buying is that generally, not always, but generally, it means that you're going to be larger upfront cost, probably taking on more debt and having some sort of debt repayment structure that can really set you back in terms of your cash flow. And so when buying a business, you're not just thinking about the day one cash flow, but you've got to think about, all right, what opportunities are there to grow and expand this business? Which I think is something that you, again, alluded to in mentioning like the landscaping company, because yeah, you've got those 50 accounts, but with how easy it is or with how much competition there is in the landscape space, how difficult is it going to be to grow from 50 accounts to 100 accounts?
Yeah.
What kind of stresses is that going to put on your systems, your employees? And yeah, then relative to the cost of buying the business versus starting something yourself.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's a good pivot point here to, starting a business and some of those pros. And I think cost is a big thing, because the reality of it is that, you're buying something that is established, that has customers most of the time, that has a reputation. And so you have to pay for that, and you're trading that. And so it really is what path is right for you. As we started this episode here, and I think you and I were talking a little bit beforehand, most of the guests I think that we've had on didn't buy, but they actually started something from scratch. And that's been, I think, what's been enjoyable is getting to hear their journeys, right? I mean, we've heard story after story of the good old days or the early years or getting first customers or blazing their own trail. I mean, I think that definitely resonates with that entrepreneurial spirit a little bit more. And so that's been really fun. But I just recognize that we look at the pros of buying a business. We look at some of the pitfalls of buying a business, but we also recognize that most people don't go that route. Most people start something on their own. What are some reasons you think that people start versus buy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for a lot of folks, it's because you have the vision to do something new or fresh, and you just think it's going to be easier to start at ground zero than to try and take something that already exists and have to rebuild it or re-identify it or change a culture. Sometimes changing a culture is more difficult than establishing something brand new from the beginning. So I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, they feel like, okay, I've got some expertise in this particular industry or area, but I'm seeing that there's a hole. I'm seeing that there's a need that in the market that hasn't been filled by anybody else, and I want to try and fill that hole. And in order to do so, they feel like they've got to create something new. So I think that's a really big piece of it. Like it's pretty vision driven. I think of the wealth management guys, Jason and Ian, that we had on a couple months back, and for them seeing like, yeah, there's this big hole in wealth management, and there's this big issue within the culture of wealth management that doesn't seem like most wealth managers are actually doing what's in the best interest of their clients. They're just kind of pushing the products that are most profitable for the wealth management company. And for Jason and Ian, they're like, yeah, we don't want to do it that way. We think that there's a better way. So we're going to go out and start our own model, our own thing. And they've been able to execute on that in a way that feels very rewarding and satisfying to them. And that's certainly what it's been for me as well. Like just really wanting to from the very get-go, be able to start businesses that feel unique or new within the market, and to be able to create some distinction between myself and my services and what I'm offering versus the other options out there available to folks. It's also, in a way, easier. It's in a lot of ways harder to start your own business, but one of the things that we didn't talk about explicitly in the buying a business is that trying to find the exact right fit is tough. Like buying a business is not, it's not easy. It's not even like buying a home. There have to be so many pieces that come into place, and in a lot of ways it's kind of like dating or marriage, where you're having to form that relationship with the owner and with the employees and see if it's a good fit there. You're also having to negotiate the price for the business. And Sean Puri, he talks about how babies cry, dogs bark, and deals fall apart. Like that's just the nature of them. And so you put in a lot of time and investment and whatnot up front, and there's a really high likelihood that deal never closes of you actually buying the business. As you talked about our fencing and decking thing, like that was months of conversation and going through numbers and trying to think through, all right, is there a path forward here? And it was all for naught. And I think that decking and fence company went through that like 4 times before they actually had a buyer.
I think you're right.
So that can be a real barrier for folks. Like when it comes to buying a business, is finding the right fit. Whereas when you're starting a business, nobody's there to tell you, no, you can't do it. You might not have any customers, but there's, all of the like Squarespace or whatever, all of those platforms are all too happy to sell you a website domain and help you build a website. Canva's there to help you put together a brand. You can send out mailers, you can make phone calls, you can create your Facebook business page. Like, there's nobody there that's going to be like, nope, you can't do it. So when it comes to like barrier to entry, it's extremely low, and you can do it on a shoestring.
Totally.
You get to decide how much you're going to invest. You get to decide very early on what kind of debt you're going to take on, what kind of funding you're going to take on. Like, it can be its own sort of challenge, but your options are really limitless for how you're going to lay the foundation of your business when you're starting something from scratch.
I think you've said that well, and you've kind of hit on some of the pros and cons, of both there. But that entry point, not only is it limitless, but it's quicker. And I think about that as I've spent a few years looking at different businesses to buy, and I ended up buying a business that I never thought I'd be in. So I definitely didn't go with a laser focus of this is the industry I want, this is the type of business I want, this is the location I want. I haven't revealed the location yet either, but that's something in my story. Right. But I think you're absolutely right. So from setting culture to hitting the ground running. And then a big one I'm going to camp on for a minute, like you just said, is that cost factor. That goes both ways. The reality of it is that banks, putting on my banker hat, is that banks oftentimes, they do not like startups. They do not like new ventures. And most traditional banks aren't going to lend to somebody for 2 years. They want to see 2 years of history of success and progress, and that you haven't blown yourself up, and that your idea, you've taken it to market and you can do it. So on one hand, you are either self-funding, or you're finding partners or you're finding investors who can help you get this thing off the ground. So that can be a challenge, but your barrier, again, not only barrier to entry in the market is quicker, but I think your costs are much lower traditionally. Whereas with buying a business, the bank will look at you and say, oh, well, here's the history of the business, and here is the clients that are repeat, and here's the systems in place. So they can oftentimes feel more comfortable to lend to you. So it's interesting, again, it depends on how you're looking at that side of the coin, but both are true. I mean, On one hand, I think you can jump in much quicker. It's less expensive, but on the other hand, you're going to have a harder time getting financing.
Right. And because taking the landscaping business, because we've used some of the numbers there, that was going to be a little bit over $1 million acquisition. So we were going to be using an SBA loan. We were going to be taking on significant debt, $700,000 or $800,000 with kind of a minimal down payment is what we're looking at. And it's like that all of a sudden has to start being repaid right away. But the bank they can look at the track record of the business. They're pretty happy to lend that. And in that case, the business had 4 months or 5 months of jobs already lined up. So you knew that there was going to be income coming through the door reasonably. You knew that you could expect that, and that you're going to be able to repay the debt. Versus when you're starting something, there's not we could have started a landscaping business for maybe that same amount as the down payment, 150 grand. The issue is, and this is what I'm feeling, is like I'm spending money on marketing and advertising. I'm spending money on building a brand and a reputation, but especially in this newest business that I'm laying the groundwork for, like it's been 3 or 4 months of just pure expenses. And while those expenses are not in the $1 million range, there's also like it's just money out the door right now with no guarantee of money coming back. And which no wonder banks don't want to lend to that. They're like, oh, you just have proven that you know how to spend our money. But
Oh
you're
man.
not proven that you can make any return on that yet. And that is one of the struggles to starting up, is that, yeah, you can do it on the cheap. But there's generally that first several months of getting things off of the ground. If things get off the ground where you're just having to spend money.
Yep. I think that's huge. And it's interesting that you share that transparency. I think that I look on as another pro of starting a business. And honestly, I think a necessity. When I look at the business that I bought, I'm quickly becoming passionate about it. I have to, because I've invested money into it. But I think I shared with you, like, hey, I didn't, for the last couple of years, my idea hasn't been to buy that specific type of business. I think honestly, though, on the other hand, a lot of times people start businesses with a passion in mind, with an excitement, you've said it, I see a need in the market. I see a problem in the market. I want to solve it. I want to help in this capacity. And so I think on two sides, one, that is a pro of starting a business, because you get to do something instantly you're passionate about most of the time. But then I would also say the other side of that is a pro, and I think you're talking about it, is when it's tough early on, when you're grinding and you're gutting it out. That's what keeps you going. That is what keeps you going in those long days. Is this worth it? Am I going to reach it? The passion there and the love for making a difference, the love for what you're building, is the thing that propels you through. Would you agree? I mean, have you experienced some of that?
Yeah, for sure. That and some of it's just the way that I'm wired, is that if I really struggle to work on things that I don't deeply care about, work that I don't deeply care about, or that I don't see have a real clear vision for. It just, it's like sandpaper to the soul for me over time. And I'm not saying that everybody is that way, or that that's even necessarily a healthy way. It just kind of is what it is. So yes, with the businesses that I've started, it's always been with like, okay, I want to make a positive change here. I want to serve people in a very particular way, to do what I don't see many others doing. And having that like mission vision behind the business definitely drives you forward. And there's it makes it easier too to celebrate small wins, I think, because again, you're starting from zero. So there's like there's no track record. You're not looking back on previous quarter numbers from what the previous owner has done and being like, oh my gosh, like at the peak, this business was doing $70, $80, $90,000 a month in revenue. And like, now we're doing a fraction of that. Like I got to get back to the good old days. When you're starting from zero, it's like, oh my gosh, I got a client. Like I got one. Like we had $1 come in the door today, and you put that first $1 up on the wall. Like that's something you really only have the opportunity to do when you're starting out.
Yeah.
Being able to celebrate those victories early on, and another piece that I think about too. And this really depends on what somebody's vision for business is. For me, like I would really love to ultimately build a business designed for an exit. Not to say that like I have to exit a business, but like I just want to start with that end
Totally
in mind. And to some degree, starting a business helps you set that trajectory early on. But there's just the question of like, okay, taking something from 0 to 10 versus taking something from 10 to 100. When you're buying a business to make it 10x the value, you've got to go 10 to 100. And knowing my personality, like it's way easier for me to imagine taking something from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 and creating value that way, and then handing it off, selling it to somebody that's really a master at system building and can take something to the next level. That's just not something that I have, I think, the natural aptitude for in the same way. Like I just enjoy the like scrappy, making it work, figuring it out, and proving the viability of something, versus taking something that's proven its viability and then putting in all the system structures in place to really scale it to 10x growth.
I think that's huge. And I think, as we've kind of done some reflection on, who is that kind of person, I think it's a different skill set. It's a different type of person. And even Ryan was talking about that. I remember, I loved his analogy, and y'all need to check out that episode if you haven't. It is just from sheer like practical advice and nuts and bolts on how to grow. It was one of my favorite episodes we've done. But I remember he talked about that. He's like, it's a total, complete different skill set to go from 0 to 10 than it is from 10 to 100. Not only is it a different skill set, it's a different game you're playing. And so it's fun, I think, with you and I both in the driver's seats of these two different types of things. Because I am in that, how do I go from 10 to 100? And what does that exit look like? And for you, you're in the 0 to 10. What is that journey? What does that exit look like? But what's been common, a theme for both you and I, is what does that exit look like? And I think that's a nice thing to camp on for a minute, because so many folks don't begin with the end in mind. And I think a lot of times, as we've recently been into talks about, hey, so many people are trapped. They're slaves to their job that they've created. They're slaves to their business. It's costing them more than they're willing to give. And how many times have we heard that over and over and over from our guests? There was a period, there was a season, there was a time where they were just like, is this worth it? And so I think ultimately having that end in mind is essential. Whether you're starting something from scratch or you're buying something, what's the exit strategy? What are you working towards? And what's the end goal of this thing? And I think that helps you see that finish line. It helps you get through those grueling days because you can see the reward at the other end of it.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. And that you want to avoid aimlessness in everything, right? And there are some folks that, and I think it's really noble, like that they want to start a business because they want something that they can pass down to their children. Like their vision for it is a very long-term kind of thing. Like build something that's good for the community, that serves a number of other families by creating solid jobs, provides a good service that the local area needs, and then have something that is producing consistent income for your family, and that your kids could take over someday. So that's definitely one like vision to have in mind. That's good, and that's going to help you build in a particular way, versus building with like in 5 to 7 years, I would really love to sell this business to somebody else and go and do something else. So knowing how you're wired, knowing what your ultimate goals are, knowing what it is that you like to do. If you just have a passion for building things. Like you know that you want to be working with your hands. You love building decks and fences, then you're probably going to build something in a way that it's like, okay, let's just get this to a good sustainable level where I've got good balance and freedom and I'm able to make a good living. And you recognize that, this will probably be hard to sell, but that's not why I'm doing this business. Versus if you're somebody like, I think that you could succeed in almost any industry because for you, it's more about the game of a business. And so, while there's some particulars to each business, whether it's decking and fencing or landscaping or doing something in the financial services industry, you're like, okay, I got to find customers. I've got to sell them a product, and then I've got to deliver on the product that I've sold them. And so I'll just build the systems to maximize profitability and get all that in place. And once I've got those systems in place, I'll plug the right people in, and then I'll do that on another company or another business. You've got that Dave Ederer sort of mindset where you're just like, hey, if it's a good business and there's some meat on the bone, like I will find a way to maximize that. And that's another real way of adding value. But it's a totally different approach to entrepreneurship because it's less about the very particular business that you're building and has a whole lot more to do with just, I enjoy the game of business generally and recognize that there's these principles that I can apply to almost anything, anywhere. And that might be one of the differences too in starting something versus buying something. And kind of as I alluded to, like that's not like, I enjoy some elements of the game. I enjoy creating a brand and brand awareness and messaging, positioning, those kinds of things. I don't enjoy system building at all. And I do enjoy more, just not to say that you don't have mission, vision driving the businesses that you're interested in. But I just enjoy that element of it, such that it's like, I don't want to be part of just any industry. Like I want to be part of very particular things.
Totally.
That lends itself probably more to starting something from scratch, again, because it's just hard to inherit or purchase the exact right business that checks all the right boxes for me to get excited about it, versus an entrepreneur that just is like, no, like I will find a way to be profitable in any industry. Like if there is a proven track record of you can make money in this industry, I will play that game to the very best of my ability. So it's a fairly introspective thing, I think, that we're asking our listeners to evaluate.
Totally.
What way are you wired? Any additional sort of qualifications you might add to that?
I love what you're saying. And I think the thing that just continues to come back to my mind is to go against the grain of the social media feeds these days. It seems like, at least mine, because obviously I'm always checking out entrepreneur feeds. But
that algorithm has you down,
right,
bro.
It's got me down for sure. But I think the thing is that there isn't one way. And a lot of times people are very vocal that my way is the only way. My way is the best way. Right. And I think we just want to continue to buck against that because we're all uniquely wired. We're all uniquely gifted. We're passionate about different things. And that's been the beauty of the community, I think, that we've continued to build, both with you listeners. Thank you for continuing to hang out with us for almost 100 episodes. But I think in addition to that, the guests we've had on, we have had both. We have had I'm going to roll up my sleeves, and I would never build a team. I think about the Tori Dollies of the world who's like, hey, the solopreneur is the way to go. And then we've got guys who are managing hundreds of employees and building and scaling and going multi-regional. Sometimes these guys are building branches. I think some of the storage guys we've talked to, they're doing deals overseas.
Right.
And so there isn't a right or wrong. And I think it ultimately comes back to, what do we talk about all the time? Are you being a producer? Are you building pies instead of being a consumer and saying, I want to get as big a piece of that pie as I can. I'm just in it for myself. I think the thread that continues to really unite our community is, hey, we want to build big things. We want to scale, whether we want to scale something that we've bought, whether we want to be a trailblazer in a new industry and start this thing up. Ultimately, our goal is to help empower you, enable you, give you the tools to grow and scale. But it is that why. And that's what we're most passionate about. It is, how can you make a difference in the community around you? How can you invest into the business marketplace and be different than so many people who are like, hey, I just want to get as much money as I can. And I don't care who I got to step on to get that. It's just not what we're about. And ultimately, we want to see lives and families and businesses grow, and ultimately for the sake of bettering everybody around us. And I think that's what we're passionate about. And so I enjoy that piece to our conversations, because it isn't just, this is the only way. Real estate is the only way. Buying business is the only way. Starting up businesses is the only way. We just recognize there's a million plus ways to do it, but it's the why, I think, that unites us.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And, not to it feels like we've pigeonholed you a little bit in you're the buy the business guy and I'm the start it, but really, like, Abundant Journey and this podcast and the community that we've been able to build through this, like, this is your startup, man. So It's also to your point of that, hey, you can do both.
Yep.
You don't have to say that, like, yeah, I'm the business acquisition person and I'll never do a startup, or vice versa. That you might have a history of starting businesses, and yet if an opportunity presents itself to purchase a business, acquire something, you can do both. And hopefully it's just helpful to kind of have these categories of, all right, there's some unique advantages and challenges, whichever path you choose.
Yep. Well said, man. And I think this has been a fun discussion today, just ultimately, talking through, and I think it's been fun to kind of reflect back on some of those guests that we've had. And we're going to continue to do that range of guests, both with folks who buy and their journeys, and folks who start, and they did start, and look at where they've grown it and scaled it, because ultimately we want our listeners to continue to learn and get the tools that they need to grow and scale. So maybe I make a pitch here too, as we continue with this, if you got people that come to mind that would be a good fit for the show, send them our way. And in addition to that, if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling burnout, if you are in a place where you're like, man, I would love to get some support around what I'm growing and what I'm building, and maybe, there's a roadblock that you're not sure of how to overcome, hey, we're better together. And we say that all the time here. And so we're happy to, at least be a sounding board. We're happy to dialogue with you. And, oftentimes you and I don't have all the answers, but we got a pretty good network at this point that we've been building, and we'd love to do some introductions. So
100%. This is great, man. I love it. And listeners, I'm so grateful for all of you that have been coming along this journey with us so faithfully now. I'm looking forward to everything that the new year holds. I know that we'll do a couple more episodes that are a bit more reflections on different guests we've had on, what it's been like doing a couple years of podcasting. But as good as this is for Nick and I, the real reason that we show up week in and week out is to serve, benefit, and connect with y'all. So please do subscribe to the show. Leave comments. We read and respond to all of those. And then if you want to get in touch with us personally, just hello@abundantjourney.net, oldschool.net. You'll reach us that way, and we would love to connect with you there. Let us know if you bought a business, if you're starting one, if there's anything that we can do, like Nick said, to serve you. We'd love to connect that way as well. But thanks, everybody. We'll be back again next week.